Because of the routine, people start to think that their life is boring and monotonous. They can't find a reason to enjoy life again, and this already leads to terrible actions that lead to no less terrible consequences. Paul and Jane had been married for 22 years, and their marriage wasn't always perfect. Jane often voiced frustrations about unfinished tasks, and Paul dedicating too much time to his hobbies. On the other hand, Paul was frequently puzzled by Jane's seemingly endless habit of purchasing items for their home. However, these were minor issues in what was otherwise a long and very happy marriage. At 45, Jane remained an attractive and mature woman. She had gained only a few pounds over the years, and it enhanced her figure in all the right places. In school, she had been quite plain and struggled to build friendships and self-confidence. Yet many of the popular girls who had teased her back then now appeared noticeably frumpy. Jane worked as an office manager in a government department, where she was both competent and well-respected. When they got married, Paul found Jane very pretty, but now she had become truly beautiful and elegant. Her secret was an exceptional physique that seemed to improve with age. She could be described as voluptuous, although most of her curves were hidden beneath modest and conservative clothing. Paul maintained his fitness by working as a self-employed and energetic project manager. With sandy hair and standing at 5'10", he didn't particularly stand out in a crowd, but he was highly popular within a close group of longtime friends. They each coped with empty nesting in their own way. Paul cherished the extra free time to revisit his hobbies and enjoyed the additional hours available. He felt more fit and energized, yet he was concerned about his wife, who longed for their children. It was more than just missing them. She described it as an emptiness. Jane had a vibrant personality and maintained a healthy balance between family and social activities, but with the kids off at college, some of that shine was gradually fading. Paul exhausted all his ideas to uplift his devoted and loving wife. When explaining her feelings to friends, Jane thought of it as a lack of purpose. Jane felt increasingly distant, leading Paul to consider whether menopause or depression might be factors. Paul encouraged Jane to return to the gym, which provided some relief. Although she never enjoyed working out, it helped pass the time, and she appreciated the results, such as the tightening of the slight jiggle that had appeared on her lower stomach and buttocks. Paul was impressed with her progress and urged Jane to showcase her hard work and enjoy her newfound fitness. He believed she deserved some new clothes. He hoped this would give her a much-needed confidence boost alongside his support. Jane appeared to be putting more effort into her appearance, and Paul hoped she was beginning to improve. The dark leggings and loose tops were replaced with fitted skirts and silk blouses. Paul thought her newly toned figure looked fantastic in the new outfits. She continued her long-standing tradition of nights out with the girls, which Paul supported. In her younger years, Jane didn't attract many admirers. She was rarely approached, as her best friend Helen always drew the attention in that area. It seemed to happen more often now, but Jane was quite skilled at gracefully declining any advances. Her friend group was pleasant, and Helen, who had recently separated, was dating again and had a steady boyfriend they frequently talked about on the phone. Jane typically returned from girls' nights out feeling happy, slightly tipsy, and very talkative. It was enjoyable to see some of the old Jane during those evenings. Their intimacy relationship had slowed down a bit, but these nights were when intimacy was most likely to occur. Jane was quite reserved in bed, and having a drink helped her relax. For her, it was about making love and fostering a connection and emotional bond rather than just having intimacy. Paul was saddened by her decreased interest. Both of them were inexperienced when they got married, and the initial spark seemed to fade with the arrival of their children. Paul tried various methods, being more assertive, planning romantic date nights, taking weekend trips, experimenting with different positions and locations. But none of these efforts elicited an enthusiastic response. Jane never complained, saying everything was good, but she also never took the initiative herself. When Jane mentioned attending a house party at Helen's, Paul was nearly ecstatic. Any chance to go out and have fun would be a great boost for Jane. That evening they got ready and took a taxi to Helen's residence. Paul thought Jane looked breathtaking in a snug satin dress that highlighted her figure, and he complimented her on her appearance. She responded with a warm smile. "Thank you. I feel a bit self-conscious in this dress, but you've just made me feel better about it. You have a wonderful gift for making those around you feel good. You're always so kind and understanding. I love you." Paul appreciated Jane's response, but it lingered in his mind, reminiscent of many similar comments he'd heard over the years. He was a genuinely nice person, kind and caring and so on. This often held him back in his younger years, keeping him in the friend zone with girls he wanted to date. Sometimes he felt the same way with Jane. He was sure she loved him, but he wondered if she truly desired him, and if he was being selfish by still wanting both after so many years together. When they arrived at Helen's, it was a lovely venue with plenty of space, hosting around 40 guests and offering a great atmosphere. Helen seemed slightly taken aback to see them together. "Hi, Paul. It's great to see you. It's been a while." She glanced over at Jane, who smiled and nodded in return. "Nice to see you too, Helen. I'm sorry about your breakup, but Jane mentioned you're back into dating." "Yes, I am. Let's get some introductions going." Helen introduced her boyfriend, Nev, and as they shook hands, Jane expressed her desire to introduce Paul to their friend Will. Will extended his hand. He was clearly fit, and Paul wasn't a fan of forced handshakes, casually avoiding a firm grip. They engaged in some small talk, and Jane introduced a few more people, including some Paul already knew. He sensed that some of the other guests were surprised to see Jane with a partner, likely because they rarely attended each other's social events. After an hour had passed and Paul had settled into conversations, Jane began moving between different groups. Paul saw her talking with Will and Nev, who were part of a close-knit circle that included Helen and others who attended the girls' nights out. Jane frequently returned to check on how Paul was doing. Paul noticed Will drape his arm around Jane's back as she rejoined their group. What struck him most was that Helen didn't initially ignore it. Instead, she gave Paul a nervous glance and moved away from Will's arm. Something didn't feel right. Paul considered leaving or addressing the situation, but didn't want to cause a scene, thinking any accusations would appear immature. Wanting to understand more, he casually asked those he was speaking with if they knew Helen's group, but no one was very forthcoming, though one woman suggested they might go out together as couples. After having a few conversations, grabbing another drink and trying to organize his scattered thoughts, Jane was nowhere to be seen. Paul searched the ground floor before heading out to the garden. Just as he was about to give up, he heard voices near the side of the house and followed the path around. As he approached, Paul heard Helen clearing her throat, trying to warn Jane. "Jane! Jane, it's Paul!" Paul couldn't believe his eyes. Jane was kissing Will, her arms wrapped around his shoulders. She pulled away from the kiss and looked at Helen, who was nodding toward Paul with raised eyebrows and a look of concern. Jane exclaimed, "Oh, Paul, sorry, it was just a little kiss. Maybe we had too much to drink." Paul moved toward Will, but Jane quickly placed herself between them, panicking at the sight of Paul's anger. They all paused. Without Jane's intervention, Paul might have struck Will. Perhaps that was for the best, considering that Will looked younger, stronger, and more fit. "I'm sorry, Paul. It was nothing, really. I think we need to talk." "No, we don't." Everything felt so unreal. Paul couldn't fully understand what was happening. He needed to leave before he completely lost control and stormed away, with Jane calling after him. Jane was upset. The evening hadn't gone as planned. She regretted trying to steal a quick kiss with Will. Jane had been surprised when Nev, Helen's boyfriend, brought Will along for their Thursday night outing. Will approached her and was incredibly charming. She wasn't used to receiving so many compliments, especially from a much younger and handsome man. Together, he and Nev praised the virtues of mature women. Will clearly admired her and didn't hesitate to show it, which was quite overwhelming. For the first time in her life, Jane was experiencing thoughts and desires she wasn't sure she could or wanted to control. She still loved her husband, but Will was an irresistible mystery. Meeting and interacting with different, younger, and exciting people was thrilling. She found herself obsessing over Will. He was constantly on her mind. The next morning, Paul and Jane were seated at their kitchen table. "I'm really sorry, Paul. Last night was a huge mistake. Everything feels so muddled and I can't think straight. Spending time with my friends has made me realize that we can share experiences with others. Our relationship doesn't have to be the only focus. There can be different facets to our lives. There's nothing wrong with having friends, but it seems like he's your boyfriend. Are you planning to leave me?" "Don't be ridiculous, Paul. He isn't my boyfriend, and I have no desire to leave you. We go to bed together every night, wake up together, and intend to spend our lives together. Except when you're with your boyfriend." "I don't have a boyfriend, Paul. Please stop saying that." "Kissing, touching. What the hell is he then?" "He's just a friend, that's all." "Bullshit. It clearly wasn't the first time." Jane paused, carefully navigating the conversation while striving to be honest. She truly loved Paul, and they were meant to spend their lives together. "I don't think I was in a healthy place, Paul. No. I need to hold on to what has helped me emerge from that dark spot. I need you and your constant support, as well as some time with my friends." Paul recoiled at that. "You mean time with Will?" She was aware of the issue. She knew it was wrong, yet she genuinely wanted to continue seeing Will. She didn't want to hurt Paul or deceive him. He deserved honesty. "I'd like to keep spending time with our group. We're all great friends," she said. Paul was furious. "I'm assuming you mean Will specifically. You're more than just friends. Are you having an affair?" "No, absolutely not. It's not an affair." "Well, I have a strong feeling that your other friends are fully aware of your relationship with this guy. Stop calling it an affair. They see us together more often than I see you, that's all. I suppose that speaks volumes on its own. He's Nev's friend, and we hang out together. Once you get to know him, you'll like him. I have no intention of getting to know him. The man lacks morals and is trying to seduce my wife. Unfortunately, it seems he's succeeding. How far has this gone?" "We've mostly been talking and dancing." "And kissing?" "Yes, we've kissed a few times. It's no big deal." Paul glared at her. "It's a big deal to me, and you're trying to downplay it. I assume it's more serious than that. Even if you haven't had intimacy yet, that's where this is heading. Our marriage is hanging by a thread, and you seem determined to break it. Are you in love with him?" "What? No, of course not. I guess there's something between us, an attraction. We like each other, but we're just good friends, nothing more." "How often do you see him?" You both looked very comfortable together. "Well, we get together as a group on Thursdays, and I had lunch with him a couple of times." "Oh my God, did you really go on dates with him?" "No, it's just lunch. He's a good conversationalist, and it's nice to get attention from a younger guy. I like him, and I think he likes me too." "You practically described the date. Why did you introduce him at the party? Did you want to embarrass me?" "Not at all. I wanted you to get to know each other. I thought you'd like him. He's a wonderful man, and I've been telling him about you. I was hoping that we could all become friends to avoid tension or misunderstandings." "Wait, you don't expect me to agree with that, do you? You have to understand that he will want more. It's obvious that he wants more, and now it's becoming clear what you want. You're jumping to conclusions too fast. I'm far from that yet. But if we both agree, and it turns into something more, would that be so bad?" "Honey, I don't want to be harsh, but you're slowing us down a little bit, and we still haven't solved your problem with performance. I'm sure we can work this out, but maybe a little innocent communication with will help us move on." Jane immediately realized that she had made a terrible mistake. It seemed that Paul was about to lose his composure. She avoided talking about his periodic problems, but her explanation that they were just friends began to sound insincere, even to herself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Are you kidding me? So it's about intimacy, and it's my fault? Well, to hell with you, Jane." Paul slammed all the doors shut as he left. Jane cried out in exasperation, berating herself for being so stupid. She wasn't sure what she was doing anymore. The kisses seemed natural. She didn't intend to go any further, but somehow she made Paul feel like he could be replaced. She was in serious trouble. Why did she mention his difficulties at all? Paul has always been a wonderful partner. He had rare problems, but he always compensated for it, and their doctor was confident that they could overcome it. If anything, she hadn't put enough effort into their intimate life herself. After years of being tired of raising children, they simply failed to regain intimacy. Jane was taken aback when she realized her marriage was in trouble. Paul loved her and had always been there to support her. Hadn't he? She certainly loved and cared for him as she always had. The situation with Will was just confusing, and she was sure it would resolve itself. Paul felt utterly defeated, devastated by the thought that his wife might move on because he couldn't fulfill her needs in the bedroom. He considered moving out or separating, but realized that might be the fastest way to push Jane into Will's arms. How far had things gone? Kissing seemed like too flimsy a reason to end their 22-year marriage, yet he suspected it was more serious than that. Then there were the children and extended family to consider. How would they react? Thankfully, the kids were grown, though it would still hurt them. For the time being, he decided the best course of action was to wait and hope Jane would come to her senses. He knew it was a poor plan with little chance of success, but he felt he had no other options. Jane was urgently seeking ways to address Paul's worries without sacrificing her current lifestyle. She was being excessively kind and continuously apologizing about the party. However, things were about to escalate, with the next hurdle being the planned Thursday night outing. "Paul, I understand Thursday will be tough for you." "Really? You're still going?" "We're just meeting up with some friends for a few drinks, nothing more. Sharon mentioned she has an extra movie ticket, and I thought you might prefer going with her instead of feeling down." "What are you trying to do, Jane?" "Pass me off to our neighbor to lighten your guilty feelings." "Don't be silly, Paul. You are mine and only mine, but we can both maintain friendships with others. Plus, you and she have always gotten along really well." Paul shook his head, uncertain whether Helen was simply unaware or indifferent. As he reflected, he realized he had been the one putting all the effort into the physical aspect of their relationship. He wondered if Jane still loved him but no longer felt attracted to him, contemplating whether it's possible to transition into a friendship after 22 years of marriage. When Thursday evening came, Jane chose to wear a simple skirt and blouse, but still went out for the night. She kissed Paul goodbye, assuring him that it was just a regular group outing and that nothing inappropriate would occur. Eventually, Paul ended up going to the movies with Sharon. They had been friends and neighbors with Sharon and her husband Mike for years, until Mike tragically died in a car accident. Paul was pleasantly surprised when he picked up Sharon. She looked lovely in a summer dress and wedge sandals. Her shoulder-length blonde hair was neatly tucked behind one side of her ear. Her entire outfit had a relaxed and natural feel that matched her personality. She blushed when Paul complimented her. "Wow, you clean up nicely. You look angelic." "Stop it, you idiot," she replied, giving his arm a playful punch. They enjoyed the movie and then went for coffee afterward. Paul behaved like the perfect gentleman, and Sharon was an excellent confidant to help him ensure he wasn't losing his mind. Thankfully, she reassured him that he was fine, though she did playfully challenge his thoughts. "I suppose we both recognize how crucial her friends are, and I understand why she values those things." "Absolutely. I've never opposed her friendships, hobbies, or nights out. In fact, I've always been supportive of them." "So, the main issue revolves around her relationship with Will." "Partially, but there are other concerns as well, such as disrespect and selfishness. But here we are, a man and a woman, friends in a relationship and going out together. Is it really that different?" Paul chuckled warmly. "Nice attempt, Sharon, and I'm sure that was exactly Jane's intention. However, she has acknowledged that it has progressed beyond that. If we started kissing, it would become a different kind of relationship." Sharon smiled at the thought of kissing Paul. It was undeniably an appealing idea. They continued their conversation comfortably, shifting to less troubling topics. As always, Paul inquired about her and her family, listening attentively to her responses. Despite his evident distress, he remained quick to laugh and joke. She could only speculate about Jane's behavior. It all seemed so unlike her. Jane was the kindest person she knew and had been incredibly supportive after Mike's passing. They decided to meet the following week if Jane was out with her group again. Jane's evening went as she had planned. She promised to maintain her distance and ease things with Will, which she managed except for one dance when he managed to join her. Everything was going smoothly until he offered her a ride home. It felt rude to decline, and she also needed to explain the situation with Paul to him. That only took about 10 minutes before they were kissing again. Paul lingered at the kitchen table for what felt like forever, after coming back from his evening out with Sharon. He was on his third beer when Jane finally walked in. She attempted to appear cheerful and carefree, acting as if nothing had occurred. "You're late," she remarked. "Yeah, just a little." "Who were you with?" "The usual group." "You know exactly what I mean." "All right, yes, Will was there, but he mostly hung out with Nev." "You might want to check social media before you continue lying." Jane hurriedly checked her phone and panicked. One of the girls had probably taken a picture. In the photo, she was visible in the background, standing beside Will, who had his arms around her, pulling her close. "It was just the end of a dance with a friend." "Well, it's great for everyone to see that picture of you and him. Thanks for that. It's not embarrassing at all. And did that friend drop you off?" "No, yes, crap." Jane took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Yes, Paul, Will did drop me off." "You look really flushed. It must have been a lengthy makeout session." "We were discussing our relationship. I was telling him that we needed to maintain some distance. It's nice that there are 3 of us in this relationship now. What else did you do?" Jane's head lowered, tears welling up as she became emotional. "I love you. I'm truly sorry. I don't know what's happening with me." "Did you have an intimacy?" "No, Paul, it wasn't." "But you wanted to. You wanted to be with him. It's weird. We don't do this very often, and then all of a sudden you can't resist this guy." I'm not sure. Okay, yes, I really wanted to go further, but I didn't do it because I love you." "You say you love me, but you're not as attracted to me as you are to your new friend. Will you stop talking to him?" "I do not know if I can. It's hard for me to restrain myself around Will. I know I'm hurting you, and that's the last thing I want." But that's exactly what's happening. You understand this, but you can't or won't stop. Obviously, being with him is more important to you. I'm tired of your behavior and disrespect. I'm going to my brother's." Jane was devastated. "Please don't leave, Paul. I'll stop everything." "The truth is, you don't want to stop. It's obvious." Jane began to cry. "Please, please stay with me. I can't lose you." Paul remained, but describing the atmosphere over the ensuing weeks as chilly would be an understatement. Jane was going out of her way to be pleasant, yet even their basic interactions felt tense. On the bright side, she had been skipping their usual Thursday night outings, which Paul took as a positive indication. Determined to mend their relationship, he arranged a reservation at their favorite restaurant for the upcoming Friday evening. They had shared numerous joyous moments there and were familiar with the owners. Paul hoped the evening would feel special and that they could resume their easy conversations. He shared his plan with Jane, expecting her to be both pleasantly surprised and pleased. Jane was genuinely happy about the dinner and appreciated the thoughtful gesture. Paul truly was a considerate and patient partner. However, a wave of anxiety hit her when she recalled that she already had plans for Friday. "That's very thoughtful, Paul, but could we possibly reschedule for Saturday?" "Sure. Why?" he replied. "Helen has tickets to a charity ball and I promised I would attend. It's an important event supporting the local hospice. Would you prefer attending that over going out with me to work on our marriage?" "No, that's not what I mean. We can do both. I'm sorry, but I've already committed to going. It's a significant night for Helen since she's on the organizing committee." "Helen understands. She called me to apologize for her part in all of this." Jane paused, clearly searching for a reason to reschedule. She appeared somewhat uneasy, which wasn't the reaction Paul had anticipated. Then he realized that if it was such an important night for Helen, all their friends would likely attend. "Damn, it's him, isn't it?" "No, it's just a major event. It's significant for Helen, and everyone is coming." "So, he won't be there?" Jane averted her gaze. "Oh, I understand now. You were planning to meet up with your boyfriend. Is Friday the big night?" "No, it's not like that. I give up. You must be kidding. You've pleaded with me to stay and promised you'd stop, yet you'd rather go out with him. It's nice to see where your priorities lie, my dear wife." Paul hoped Jane would reconsider, but she was resolute that she couldn't miss the event. She and Helen had been organizing the day for a long time, with treatments scheduled and new dresses purchased. Yes, the guys would be there, but so would all her other friends. It was a significant occasion. Paul made sure he wasn't home as the final nail in their marriage began. He wanted to avoid any interaction with Jane, but couldn't help himself from reading the messages she continued to send. 7 p.m. "Just heading out. Sorry you weren't here when I left. I love you." 8:03 p.m. "Party is great, very relaxed, raising lots of money for the hospice." There was a picture of Helen and Jane embracing, and he thought they both looked beautiful. Paul had never seen Jane wear anything like that before. It was a full-length, form-fitting evening gown with a thigh-high slit, in a rich ocean blue adorned with silver sparkles. Paul wondered who had taken the photograph and for whom Jane had dressed. 9:25 p.m. "Missing you. Love you so much." 10:44. "Don't stay up waiting. I think the party will last a while." 11:50 p.m. "Don't worry, I'm okay, having a fantastic time. See you soon." 1:10 p.m. "I decided to stay at Helen's because I'm really drunk. See you tomorrow. I truly love you." It was nearly 11 a.m. the next morning when Jane came back home. She entered the kitchen and couldn't bring herself to look at Paul. Paul just knew. It wasn't even necessary to ask if she had slept with someone. Eventually, Jane was able to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry. You always are. It just happened. It wasn't intentional. I don't believe that, Jane. It was definitely planned. Was it worth it? Did he blow your mind? I don't want to discuss the details, Paul. He was passionate. It felt different between us, but I think I've moved past it. How great for you. I'm leaving. Really? Threatening to run off to your brothers again instead of dealing with our issues? No threats this time. Those are your problems, not mine. Goodbye, Jane. At that moment, Jane noticed the packed suitcase and backpack in the cloakroom. She desperately tried to think of something to make him stay, but nothing came to mind. What she had done to him was awful. She hadn't fully considered the consequences of her actions in the drunken fog the night before. She had hoped there would be time to explain and properly apologize. Paul left without saying another word. As he neared the end of the street, his phone started ringing, but he chose to ignore it. By the time he arrived at his brother's place, Jane had sent him 27 messages. He read them all, most of which were apologies and pleas for him to come back to her. Jane couldn't believe Paul had left. The house felt off without him. When she heard a knock at the door, she hoped it was Paul and rushed to answer, only to find Sharon standing there. Immediately, Jane broke down in tears, and Sharon offered her a comforting hug. Jane shared her side of the events leading up to the previous night. While most of the incidents matched what Paul had told Sharon, Jane described things differently, making it seem like innocent fun that gradually turned into a romantic fairy tale. Sharon didn't hesitate to voice her opinions. How would you feel if Paul and I were hooking up? You're crazy to risk losing him, especially over some girl trying to take advantage. Jane snapped, You bit H, you've always liked him. You're after my Paul. Sharon remained patient. We're friends, and I never would have tried anything, but if you throw him away, I might just do that. Jane started crying again. I think I might have thrown him away, that is, last night Oh, please tell me you didn't, you complete idiot. With no support from Sharon, Jane called Helen. What were you thinking, girl? Guys like Nev and Will are fun, but only for short-term flings. You don't leave someone like Paul for them, and you certainly don't make a scene about it. I thought I just needed to get it out of my system, sleep with Will, and then focus on Paul. Helen groaned, thinking Jane was being naive. Paul was never going to accept that. The thing is, Helen, the time spent with Will was incredible. Our closeness was special, and I enjoyed every moment. He said I was the most attractive woman he had ever been with. Helen couldn't help but exclaim, Oh my God, tell me all the details. The details have been told. You felt special. It was understandable. But what was he like? He was incredible. He understood how to take care of me, making me feel special. I was experiencing emotions that I had never felt before. But what about you and Paul? Helen asked. To be honest, I do not know. I was hoping that I could get back to Paul and rebuild our relationship, but now I'm not sure if he'll come back. I feel guilty about it, but at the same time, last night seemed to me to have really changed my life. Jane pleaded with Paul to return for several weeks, but he remained distant. She was concerned about him, knowing that his brother and sister-in-law were kind individuals, yet it wasn't the same as having a wife who cared for him. She realized he must be missing her despite her efforts. Eventually, she came to terms with the fact that it was a lost cause. Even if she had managed things differently, her actions would have inevitably driven them apart. Jane concluded that the most compassionate thing she could do was allow Paul to move forward and cease her pursuit of him. She was certain she loved him, and letting him go was necessary to prevent causing him further pain. They needed to maintain communication regarding their children and handle these interactions effectively, managing to get along fairly well. Although divorce had not been brought up, they agreed to each continue paying half of the mortgage and treat the house as an investment, deciding to sell or buy out when either of them wished or needed to. Despite Jane's refusal to return home, she was amazed at how quickly Paul overcame his anger and resentment. She expected more reproaches and accusations, realizing that she deserved it. But then it became clear to her what could explain his change in behavior. "Are you dating someone?" "Maybe with Sharon." "Sharon? Why did you decide that?" "You've always gotten along well, and she's shown interest in you." "Really? I didn't even know." "Anyway, she's dating someone else right now. I started dating Marie once." "Marie? That receptionist from your job? Oh my God, she must be about 35 inches. Paul replied sharply, still older than Will. Jane immediately stopped being annoyed and paused to think about her words. "I'm sorry, Paul. She is a good girl. I hope you will succeed. It's too early to talk about it." Paul and Marie went on several dates, and after 2 weeks their relationship became closer. Paul began to wonder if his previous problems could be related to the fact that Jane had lost interest in him. He noticed that there were no difficulties now. His confidence had returned, and they were having a great time together. When Jane found out about Marie, she realized that Paul was moving on. Having accepted his decision, she began to communicate more actively with other people. She dated Will regularly, and their relationship continued to surprise her. Jane enjoyed the attention and felt special. She started flirting more and quickly realized that she was great at it, attracting the attention of many men, especially when they found out that she was no longer married. Her wardrobe has changed. Jane felt more at ease in the relationship and began to realize how much she had missed out on in her marriage to Paul. Jane was not in an exclusive relationship with Will and knew that he was still seeing other men. So when Rob, her young colleague, started flirting with her, she supported it. He soon plucked up the courage to ask her out on a date, and she happily agreed. When she entered the restaurant, her date's jaw dropped. Instead of her usual professional business suit, she was wearing a black velvet halter-neck dress that dipped between her cleavage. She delighted in his surprised reaction, but for the first 10 minutes he was so nervous he could barely speak. Jane placed her hands on his. "Just relax, honey. We're just friends having a conversation, so there's no need to try to impress me. I already like you, and you're going to have a great night." After the initial surprise, everything went smoothly, and Rob calmed down, allowing them to enjoy the evening together. They entered the house holding hands and started kissing. In a few moments, they were in the bedroom. They spent the night enjoying each other, and for the first time, Jane felt that she liked taking the initiative in her own hands. It was a new experience for her, which brought her a lot of joy. In the months that followed, Jane dated various men. One of them suggested she be an exclusive couple, but she felt it was too early for that. In fact, there was only one thought that remained in her mind. Jane and Will continued to explore their relationship. This was an important discovery for Jane, as her married life was quite monotonous. Despite all this, she still missed the love she had once felt with Paul. It was not enough for her to just talk to him, and often she started conversations only to realize that he was not there. The memory of Paul brought tears to her eyes, and she longed for the times when he was around. Jane was taken aback when Paul showed up at her door one afternoon, appearing noticeably embarrassed. She welcomed him inside and brewed some coffee. "I need to ask you a favor, Jane." "Absolutely, anything you need." "Well, it's hard to bring up, but the business is facing some challenges, and I've had unexpected expenses and cash flow problems. I'm able to continue sending money to the kids, but I'm having trouble covering my half of the mortgage on this house. I'll get things in order, but the payment will be delayed." Jane pondered his request for a moment. "We could sell the house if you want, Paul. You've been generous in letting me stay here." "No, that's not the issue. It's a solid investment for both of us, until we're either ready to sell or one of us decides to buy out the other. I just need a little more time. Okay, what if I take over the payments? I have some savings I can use. No, I was thinking of asking the bank for a temporary deferment. I can't use your savings. Jane smiled, knowing exactly what Paul was about to propose. Even though they weren't together anymore, she understood him better than anyone else. Paul, you've supported our family for years and never once let us down. Compared to that, this is nothing. Absolutely nothing. I insist. Paul seemed uneasy. I'm not sure. It just feels wrong. Honestly, I'm happy to help. I have no doubt you'll sort things out as you always do. I'll gladly lend you the money, but you can consider it a loan if that helps. Paul appeared to be deep in thought. Maybe a loan then, but we'd need a written agreement to make it official. Jane smiled and said, If you care about Paul, you're the most honest man I've ever known. You'll do exactly what you promise, repay me, and you've even started considering paying interest. Of course, I'll decline, but you already know that. Paul managed to smile in response. We understand each other quite well. I suppose we have a deal, and Jane, thank you. It's the least I could do. After all, I was the one who caused our breakup and the extra financial burden you're dealing with. As Paul left, Jane shed a tear. Their conversation was a joyful reminder of hundreds, maybe even thousands, of similar interactions over the years. She would willingly give Paul anything he asked for. At work, Jane attracted the attention of many, and she had a constant stream of fans who wanted to go on a date with her. She was often called an attractive woman, and such compliments pleased her. She was more modest in her youth, so this outburst of attention was both unexpected and exciting for her. Jane was enjoying her new life and felt like she was experiencing some of the most exciting moments in her personal life. She was aware that some might condemn her for her behavior, but chose not to pay attention to it. Although the dates were fun, Jane often felt lonely, and this feeling became increasingly difficult to ignore. As expected, the breakup was emotionally devastating for her, but in her opinion, by this time she should have moved on and enjoyed life to the fullest. However, why was it so difficult for her until now? Jane often saw Paul and Marie together, and it always made her jealous before she reminded herself that she had caused it. She noticed how easily they communicated with each other, how relaxed they were, and often shared smiles and laughter. She still wished Paul happiness, knowing that he deserved better. This was in stark contrast to her own fleeting relationship. Even when the right man showed interest in something more serious, Jane found an excuse to refuse. Although Jane observed their interactions, Paul and Marie's relationship began to lose momentum. They cared for each other, but the connection lacked excitement. Perhaps it moved too fast for Paul, and Marie was considerably younger. Their intimacy relationship was consistently fulfilling and had significantly boosted Paul's self-esteem, while their authentic friendship had eased much of his frustration. Both of them sensed this and decided to remain friends, albeit with benefits. It was Marie who insisted that they continue their intimate relationship until she found the right partner. Paul and Jane stood together on the train platform, having just watched their children leave for university after their Easter holidays. They had spent time with both sets of parents, adjusted to the new arrangements, and things had generally gone smoothly. Jane gave Paul a smile. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" "Sure, why not?" he responded. After updating each other about the kids, an uneasy silence settled as they each pondered their own thoughts. Breaking the silence, Jane said, "I'm truly sorry about how things ended between us, Paul. I loved you. I still love you, and I completely messed things up. Was it worth it? Did you find what you were looking for?" Paul asked. "That's hard to answer. I've lost so much with you, but I have to admit I've enjoyed exploring other things." Paul laughed. "By other things, do you mean hooking up with attractive young guys?" Jane smiled. "I'm glad you can laugh about it, Paul. It's partly true, but I miss our friendship and companionship." Paul frowned. "So, in the end, we were just friends to you? No attraction or desire?" Jane was taken aback. "No. Why would you think that?" "You were never really interested, intimacy speaking. Then another guy came along and suddenly you couldn't resist, and now it seems you just can't get enough." Jane's eyes welled up with tears as she said, "Please don't ever think that way. I've always had feelings for you and still do. I took our relationship for granted and didn't invest the necessary effort. There were always more important things I prioritized over us. The kids, friendships, myself. Never believe that I didn't love you or desire you. If we had followed your suggestions, I believe we might still be together. You've revealed a side of me I never knew existed, and I wish I had discovered that with you." Paul was taken aback by Jane's heartfelt response. She appeared sincere. He was still processing her words as she went on. "I'm happy that you're sharing everything with Marie. I don't have that kind of companionship, combined with the fact that you clearly can't keep your hands off each other. She's fortunate, and I'm genuinely happy for both of you." Paul paused before replying. "Yeah, we're doing well. It's more of a friends with benefits situation. It's enjoyable, but I hope she finds someone to commit to and love wholeheartedly." Jane was taken aback. "And that's not you?" "No, unfortunately I don't think so. She needs someone her own age. We're still friends, and the physical aspect is amazing, but neither of us has that feeling. It's hard to explain. Much of our relationship is wonderful, but something is missing." Jane sighed. "Yeah, I remember that feeling. We had it before I lost it. She's foolish if she lets you go. Isn't there anyone else?" "A few dates, but nothing serious. I just can't seem to find the right match." Without fully processing the situation, Jane's thoughts raced, and she impulsively exclaimed, "Maybe you should date me." Paul remained silent, making it seem like hours had passed when it was only a few moments. Jane began to regret her remark and started devising a way to lighten the mood with a joke. Then Paul either smiled or grimaced, paused with a sigh, and looked up at Jane. "Maybe I should." They both shrugged. Jane held her breath as Paul continued to ponder. "Let's see. Incredibly attractive woman. Impressive assets and legs usually on display. I know she's interested casually and not looking for anything serious. What could possibly go wrong?" Jane blushed, smiled, and realized she was happier than she had been in a long time. They agreed to go out for a meal the following Friday, allowing ample time for either of them to reconsider and cancel if they wished. Jane was thrilled, feeling like an excited schoolgirl anticipating her first date. Meanwhile, Paul was uncertain if he was making the right choice, convincing himself it was nothing serious, just another outing with an attractive woman. In the morning, Jane enjoyed some shopping, selecting a new deep purple cocktail dress cinched at the waist that did its best to flatter her figure. She applied her makeup, including red lipstick, and then picked out a coordinating red bustier and French knickers. To complement the dress, she needed nylons and, after much deliberation, settled on a suspender belt with barely there black stockings. She hesitated, wondering if she had gone overboard and might intimidate Paul, but remembering that he was seeing a whole new side of her, she decided to go all out. Paul admired her outfit and praised Jane for it. Their conversation was easy and comfortable, but there was a tense chemistry beneath the surface. Jane took several deep breaths, trying to calm down. Memories flooded back to both of them, because they had so many things in common that they could remember. It was one of the most memorable dates they could remember. Jane invited Paul in, and the topic of intimacy was not even discussed. They just couldn't take their hands off each other. After spending time in intimacy, they both felt like something more was awakening between them again. Jane felt incredibly happy to realize that she could still feel strong emotions around Paul. Later, Paul gently lifted her in his arms and carried her into the bedroom, where they continued their occupation, enjoying the moment and the restored connection. After they spent the night together, Paul turned to her. "I hope we both learned something." Jane touched his face with a smile. "You definitely did it." It was incredible. "Not too bad for a man who had some problems," joked Paul. "I should never have said that," Jane said, her voice cracking. "I was just looking for excuses for my behavior. It wasn't true, and what you just did for me is the best thing I've ever experienced." They continued to cuddle before falling asleep, feeling that their bond had become strong again. After her initial night with Paul, Jane began to feel anxious. She kept reminding herself that it was just another date, but she doubted her ability to handle such strong emotions. The fear of things going wrong left her distressed, and she was determined not to hurt Paul again. They continued dating a few more times while both were seeing other people. Will had moved on, but Jane dated different men, and Paul was still involved with Marie. She was unsure if Paul wanted anything more serious than a casual relationship and was too afraid to ask, worried she might lose him completely once more. Everything changed when they unexpectedly met at a bar in the town center. Jane was on a date. They had just walked into the bar as Paul was leaving after having a drink with a client. Jane introduced her husband to her date, Justin. Justin began to act jealous, implying what he and Jane might do that evening. Jane didn't hesitate to make it clear that the date would be short-lived if Justin's inappropriate behavior continued, and that her husband would always be her priority. Paul was taken aback by Jane's declaration, but Justin was even more shocked and walked away towards the bar in a huff. Jane apologized to Paul and asked him to wait for her at the entrance. She returned to her date. "I have to leave now. Because of your bad behavior and your attempt to embarrass my husband, I'm leaving with him." Her date was left feeling a mix of anger and the urge to apologize. Jane continued, "Maybe we can go out next weekend. Thank you. You've just made sure my husband will be working hard to win me back tonight. Oh, and never ask me to choose. He always comes out on top." With that, Jane turned and walked away, her heels clicking as she linked arms with Paul and left together. Her date watched her strut away, cursing her sharp tongue. The day after the restaurant argument, and 2 months since they rekindled their relationship, Jane and Paul were sitting in a downtown bar sharing a bottle of wine. Paul noticed a worried expression on Jane's face. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" "I'm really enjoying our time together, but I'm wondering if you see this going beyond casual dating and just the physical side." "I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm enjoying it too, but maybe it's best not to rush things. I love that you left your date for me last night and made me your priority. You will always be that. I know I didn't show it before, but you've always been my true love. I enjoy our dates and our intimacy, but I still feel quite lonely. I don't have what you have with Marie, someone to share things with. Actually, Marie has started seeing someone else. We've stopped, and I'm planning to move out." "Where will you go?" "Probably to my brother's place, although Cindy, his wife, is expecting." It was a foolish idea. She couldn't bring herself to say it properly, so she just blurted it out and couldn't stop talking. "You wouldn't think about moving in with me, would you? Not as husband and wife or anything like that. Maybe as a boarder or lodger or... Actually, since you're still a joint owner, you have every right to move in. Anyway, if you'd like, the offer is there. We could be, friends or something." Jane waved her hand nervously as her voice began to fade after the last remark. "Friends with privileges, then?" Paul asked, smiling broadly. That's right. After all, we are still married, so you can consider that you have certain rights. So this makes you an attractive wife and me somehow deceived. Paul chuckled. Jane laughed, not really considering that you left right away when I started dating Will. Well, it might be worth a try. I understand what I'm getting into, and the main thing is that we be honest with each other. I appreciate your company and have always loved you, but I don't want to go back to that dreary life of a housewife. I want to keep seeing other people, and I think you should do the same. Otherwise, it won't be fair. Paul smiled nostalgically. You know, I've always liked the image of a housewife, and you've never been boring to me. I understand it was something special. I was stupid. I let you down and ruined our marriage. I don't want to hurt you again. Paul tried to think through all the consequences, but eventually gave up. It was too difficult for him. Well, okay, I think we can try. At first, Paul thought of using a spare room, but they quickly abandoned this idea and found themselves in their shared bedroom on the first night. They quickly returned to their habits, finding comfort and familiarity in their routines. Despite this, both remained cautious, avoiding deep commitments and continuing to see other people occasionally, although much less often than before. Their intimate life developed rapidly, and they began to try things they had never experienced in marriage. Jane thought about Paul's comment about his attractive wife. She was thinking about how she, a seemingly ordinary middle-aged housewife, happily married to a kind and loving husband, found herself leading such an active life with different partners. Just 9 months ago, her life could have been described as quite simple. It wasn't an easy path, but was she glad she chose it? She still wasn't sure of the answer. Over time, Jane naturally began to allow herself less, as she began to enjoy spending time with Paul more. Her dates have been reduced to about once a month, usually with Rob, her first lover after Will, who was once nervous but has since gained confidence in himself. Jane was proud to have watched his development and realized that she had played a role in it. Their meetings became more casual, they did not always end in intimacy, and sometimes they were limited to kisses. It didn't make any sense. Now that it was allowed, they seemed less significant. She realized that the change was gender. It had become the most important part of her life. There were still awkward moments. They both felt awkward getting ready for dates when the other was at home. Just this evening, Paul caught Jane getting ready. One night, while lying in bed, Jane apologized once again for going out with Helen. "Do you still see her?" Paul asked. "Not much, just occasionally. She and Nev didn't work out and she travels a lot for work now." "Did she ever tell you she asked me out?" "No way. When did that happen?" "She called a few times, apologized for her part in everything, and about a month after I left, she asked if I'd consider going out with her if we didn't get back together. She even offered to break up with Nev, saying I was the kind of guy she'd always been looking for. I was stunned. She's gorgeous, and honestly it was an ego boost I needed. Helen told me I was crazy to risk losing you for Will. I guess she meant it. Did you go out with her then?" "No, not right away. But I ran into her a few months later and, well, you know." "Wow, I guess you had fun. Helen is gorgeous and, well, she's great in bed." Paul raised his eyebrows. "Oh, you know that?" Jane laughed. "Maybe. I did a lot of experimenting after we split up. Didn't you see her again?" "No," she offered, "but it felt too close to home. If I couldn't trust you, Helen was out of the question. Plus, she covered for you." Jane fell silent. "I hate thinking I made you lose trust in other people. Helen was my best friend. She tried to warn me about getting too close to Will, but didn't stop me. She was happily married for years until her husband cheated on her. She's not a bad person. I can't blame anyone else, though. It was all my fault." They were sitting comfortably watching TV when Paul's phone rang. It was Sharon, crying uncontrollably. Though he couldn't catch most of her words, it was clear she had broken up with her fiancé. Paul apologized to Jane and went to check on Sharon. It took a few hours to piece together the story of the breakup. Her fiancé had left her for his ex. Sharon was completely blindsided. Paul comforted her, assuring her that things would be okay. He was so concerned for her that he feared for her well-being. Eventually he got her to calm down, helped her into bed, and stayed in her spare room, calling Jane with an update. Jane was supportive and stopped by the next day with lunch and tubs of soup. When Paul commented on the amount of soup, Jane smiled and said that's all she ate during their own breakup. She hardly ate anything else for 2 months. Paul was surprised to hear that Jane had been so upset. He'd assumed she had quickly moved on to a new and exciting life right after he left. They kept in daily contact, helping Sharon through a slow and difficult recovery. Paul eventually convinced her to start going to the cinema with him again, something she loved, especially rewatching classic films from the 1950s. That led to other outings, including murder mystery nights, where they dressed as characters from Agatha Christie's novels set in the 1920s and 30s. Jane's dating life had come to a halt after Rob found a new girlfriend. He thanked Jane for all she had taught him, and she wished him well with his new relationship. Paul more than fulfilled Jane's emotional needs, and she found herself wanting, what was it? To be faithful, maybe. She realized she was still in love with Paul and had never loved anyone else. In what she now referred to as their previous life, she had taken him for granted. Now she appreciated his company. She spent almost all her time with him and loved every moment. Their dates were fun and exciting, and Paul was interesting, steady, and someone she could depend on. She felt jealous of the time Paul spent with Sharon, but accepted it as another sign of how good-hearted he was. With his time divided between Jane and helping Sharon, Paul had little opportunity to date anyone else. Paul and Jane were sitting on the back deck, enjoying a beer and a glass of wine. "Paul, do you think we could go back to being a married couple? I haven't dated anyone in the past 4 months, and I want to be only with you." Paul was caught off guard by the suggestion. "I don't know, Jane. This is a big decision, and I'm not sure. I love you, Paul, and I want you back, fully. I need some time to think. Can I have that?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. Just remember, I've always been here for you, and I've always loved you." A week later, they found themselves sitting in the same spot again. "Do you have any regrets, Jane?" Paul asked, curious to hear her answer. "Not now that you're back in my life. I'm sorry for how things happened and how I treated you. I got swept up with Will, and Helen's stories about Nev made me feel like I was missing something. I could blame my age or menopause, but I became selfish and lost sight of you. I never thought you'd actually leave. I wish we had explored more together back then. That's on me. I'm glad I found that part of myself, but I wish it had only been with you." Paul remained silent for a while before speaking. "I still regret it deeply. We've done the best we could with a bad situation, but I lost the security of marriage and my trust in others. I don't think I've fully recovered, and I still need more time." Jane was stunned. She had expected Paul to react positively. After all, things had been going well between them. Living together seemed to be working out beautifully, and they both had surely gained from their experiences. "You can trust me, Paul. You know I've stopped dating, and I'll always be honest with you." "You were pretty honest the first time, too. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew how it would affect me. And yet you went ahead with it, all while telling me you loved me." Paul's voice faltered and trailed off. Tears welled up in Jane's eyes. She was horrified, realizing they hadn't truly healed their relationship, only covered up the cracks. Paul took a deep breath. "I talked to Sharon about your idea, and she surprised me with a different suggestion. She asked me to consider moving in with her. The growing feelings between Paul and Sharon were undeniable. They had always gotten along as friends, their conversations flowing easily and comfortably. Over the past few months, the attraction had been there, though they hesitated. Now, Jane's request had forced the issue. Sharon, seeing this as her last chance, confessed her true feelings to Paul. "I still love you, Jane, and maybe I could even trust you again, but I can't just forget what you did. It was the injustice of it all, trusting someone so completely, only to have that trust shattered so completely. Please, Paul, don't do this. I've changed. You can trust me. If Will or Rob came back, would you turn them down? Maybe, but I'd never be certain. You can't erase the past, and I know you still flirt and enjoy the attention." Jane squirmed under the weight of Paul's words. "I can't live with that doubt, and I can't give you more. I wish I could, but I just can't. Sharon is completely honest and incredibly caring. I can't imagine her doing what you did. There are no guarantees, but with her, it feels right." Jane looked down sadly. "Well, she kept her promise. She said she would try to be with you if I gave up on you, and apparently that's what happened in the end. I think she tried to stay out of our problems, but over time our feelings got stronger," Paul said. Jane noticed the uncertainty in his eyes. His decision was not yet final. She was about to continue the conversation, but suddenly it dawned on her. "You're right, Paul. I like being special and the way it makes me feel. I love intimacy and all the moments I've experienced. I don't regret it. I wanted it. It gave me a sense of life." Paul's eyes flashed with anger. He was about to burst out, but then he noticed a tear in Jane's eyes. He nodded and stood up. "Thank you, Jane. If I loved you less, maybe we could work this out. But you almost ruined me. We had a good marriage and we have children, but it's time to move on. I'll pack my things tomorrow." Jane held on until she heard the front door slam shut. Then she burst into uncontrollable sobs. She had lost him again. She had to let him go, but it didn't make the pain any less. Paul filed for divorce, and both lawyers noted that it was one of the most peaceful divorces they had ever seen. They continued to split the mortgage payment. Paul moved in with Sharon, so Jane stayed at their old house, even though she offered to move out more than once. They stayed on good terms, exchanging updates and maintaining contact through the kids. Sharon grew concerned about Jane, noticing how lonely she seemed, while Sharon's own relationship with Paul flourished. Jane started dating again, but it didn't feel the same anymore. The thrill was gone. What she truly desired was what Paul and Sharon had. She could see firsthand how well they fit together, enjoying outings and sharing time so naturally. She made an effort to be happy for them, but couldn't fully shake the bitterness. The hardest part was the vacations. Jane and Paul had once created a places to visit list during the years when they couldn't afford trips while the kids were younger. Now Paul and Sharon were visiting those places together and planning new ones. 6 months later, Paul and Sharon got engaged. For Jane, seeing them together so often became unbearable. She decided to move into an apartment, selling their old home and splitting the proceeds with Paul. Jane was still searching for someone to settle down with, but that person seemed elusive. At their age, people came with a lot of baggage and were often set in their ways. It didn't help that Jane had gained a certain reputation, attracting attention, but none from anyone seeking a serious long-term relationship. 3 months later, the wedding invitation arrived. Despite her kids' encouragement, Jane couldn't bring herself to attend. They were thrilled for their father and the stepmother they had grown to know and love. Jane reflected once more on how she had let Paul go. Perhaps there was some justice in the way things had turned out. Her selfishness and greed had led her to this half-life she was now living.